Hi, my name is Greg Canty, and I'd like to welcome you to the Win Happy podcast. I love chatting to people from all walks of life about their lives and their careers, about the choices they make along the way to pursue their happiness, and what winning actually means to them. I hope you enjoy these conversations as much as I do. Thanks for listening. On today's podcast, I chat with Mike Baldwin, not the character from Coronation Street, but an Englishman all the same. Our neighbour from the other side of the hill loves visiting the old cottage near Goleen in West Cork, and in truth just can't spend enough time here. For his whole life, Mike's been drawn to this special cottage where his grandfather would have lived. This special needs teacher is the author of a number of books. He is obsessed about Irish folklore, the history of harps, and yes, he is also a harp maker. He loves nothing more than coming here, enjoying the relative solitude where he potters away on his projects, including bringing this old cottage back to life. Let's hear from Mike. Mike Baldwin.
Hello.
A big welcome to the Win Happy podcast.
Thank you very much.
How are you doing?
I'm doing very well.
The listener, well, I suppose we should say plural, shouldn't we? The listeners.
Two of them.
Yeah, exactly. They don't have the benefit of being here. And as much as possible, I'd like for you to describe where we are.
Right, let's start big. We're in Ireland. We're in West Cork, the rebel county, and we're not far from the Mizzen Head. We're sitting in a old stone cottage in 15 acres or so of land, surrounded by hills and mountains, and in the distance, the Atlantic Ocean. This old house was built in the early 1930s by my great-grandfather on land that's been in the family since around 1800. And although we've got none of the Irish family living here now, we're back here as often as we can be. And, you know, it's our sort of go-back-to place. For me, it's my safe place, if you like. It's the place I go back when I just need to detox, relax, do stuff that's meaningful, get away from the world. And you certainly can do that here.
And this beautiful room with the gorgeous ceiling.
It's very high ceilings. It's unusual for a house around here. But my great-grandfather was tall. My great-grandmother, I think, was nearly 6 foot. My great uncle was about 6'5", 6'6". So they moved in here in the early 30s from across the field. There's the old stone cottage with barely a roof left on it now, which was obviously very low, and they were all very tall. So one of the prerequisite must have been, let's raise the ceiling somewhat so we can all stand up.
Someone got fed up of whacking their head.
Somebody got fed up of whacking their heads. I'm sure. Yeah, there's probably more you should say about that, but no.
Yeah, if you want it high, we'll build it high. No bother.
Well, it's built out of the hillside, you know, across from where we're sitting, the hill in front of the house. You can't see it now, it's all overgrown, but when I was a child, there's a great big scar in the hillside where they just blew out the rock. So it's built out of the place. It's built out of the land, quite literally. And I think there's something kind of quite nice about that. You go on about all this eco stuff these days and the miles that materials travel. And, you know, this has literally travelled maybe 50 metres. It's just been rearranged in a different format.
And this cottage, no one is going to pass it unless you've accidentally taken a strange turn off the road from Goleen to Barley Cove. We're up on a hill. What do they do here?
What do they do? What did they do?
Yeah.
They farmed.
Okay. And it's beautiful land for farming, obviously.
Wow. The land is rough. We've got, I think there's about, 12 acres or so here. And of that, I'd say maybe 5 are good acres. They've clearly been the part of the land that's been really, really worked to get it to a point where it's fields, effectively. But most of it is bog and rock and hill and gorse. It's a bit of a battle trying to keep on top of it all. They had land further west. In fact, the story goes that They came down from Laura, I think it is in Kerry, in around 1800. And they pretty much had all of the land from here west out to Barley Cove and here east almost as far as the village. So big, big plots of land. And I think what happened over the years as, kids were born, and some went off to America. Some went off to America and came back because they couldn't sell the place. But the big farm got cut into pieces. And, we're surrounded by, there's various houses up and around us here who are all cousins, distant cousins, but all go back to the same two people who came down in 1800. It's a real sense of connection you get from that. It's quite weird.
And before you, who were the last people to live here?
The last people to live here was my great aunt and uncle, my great aunts and uncle. So there was Nora and Mike, husband and wife. And Mike was my great uncle, Nora, my great aunt by marriage. And we had Lizzie here, who was also a sister of my grandmother's. My grandmother was born across the field, 1916. As my mother used to joke, she was the cause of all the troubles, the cause of the uprising. But all 5 kids for that particular family were born over there, and God knows how many before that. We have sort of dug into it, but you can get so far, but then the records sort of run dry, whether they were never recorded or... I'm sure they were baptised, so it must be in the baptism register somewhere. Yeah, Nora and Mike lived here. Mike died in 86. I think Nora died in 97 or 98. And maybe had her last year or two in Skull. It just got a bit too much. She was in a wheelchair. And, at the time there wasn't even a track. You couldn't get a vehicle down here. So you could get a vehicle as far as the gate. So for her to leave the house was almost impossible. It didn't have a bathroom, internal. Didn't have an external bathroom.
Yeah, which
apart from nature,
quite the norm.
Well, in the late 90s, that's quite unusual. I think most places around here are probably.
Well, that's true.
It is. It had enough. We had the electricity upgraded last year. I was away at a wedding and I got a phone call from my mother, and she was here alone, and all the power had blown, and she thought it was a storm that was going on, and it wasn't. It was just the electrics had enough. But there was basically enough electricity for a kettle and a couple of light bulbs, and we'd been running a whole house and heating and everything off of it, and it had just gone. So the ESB came out and sorted all of that out. But I suppose what we've done since we took over is begin restoration, repair, put a new roof on, heating, bathroom, kitchen, which needs desperately redoing. So there's a lot of work to do here.
So when she went out that door to the nursing home in Skull, she was the last person effectively to have lived here.
Yeah.
And the gap between that moment and someone taking you over, which I presume was you, was it?
Well, it was my parents who took over. It's what Nora and Mike wanted to happen. And once, after Nora had died, we then had, 'cause while she was around, the energy was going into supporting her and making sure she had what she needed, because we were in London. It's very difficult. You're kind of coming back, and my mum's flying back and forth and coming up and down on the bus. And my mother was the nearest next of kin. Niece, I suppose. Yeah, niece by marriage. I suppose we started working here in about 99, 2000. My father was having a kidney transplant at the time. My mother was giving him a kidney. And I think they needed something as a distraction. Because obviously that sort of thing, particularly back then, husband-to-wife transplant was almost unheard of. I think they were second or third in the UK to go through that. So it was all very intense. So having this place, my father sort of going off and choosing kitchens and doing all of that sort of stuff, and my mother kind of choosing her curtains, and it was all very, they stuck to their furrows. And my dad's brother, who's from London, Chiswick, he's a plumber electrician, so he came over and did the plumbing and the electrics and all of that sort of thing. So it became a sort of distraction from all of the surgery and all of the problems that you get with that. Then they ran it, I suppose, until about 2008. And then Dad was getting really ill. The kidney was failing again. So I then took it on, and I've been doing it since then. So in a way, it's going back and redoing the jobs that they'd done, because the time had passed, and, I've learnt a lot from what they did, putting in a fitted kitchen in a house which is damp, I think is a very good way to describe it, is never going to work. And so the kitchen is falling apart. It is 20 years old, so it should be anyway, I suppose. But bit by bit, I'm building a new kitchen. Putting my mouth or my hands where my mouth is and actually building it from scratch myself, which is what I've wanted to do for a long while.
Is your mother from here?
She was born London, but yeah, she's sort of... My grandmother was born here, and she spent a lot of time as a child here. My grandmother was from Goleen, my grandfather from Durras. And so, although they were over in London, their heads and hearts were often here. So every summer, every break they possibly could would be back. In fact, my grandparents tried to move back in, I think it was 1949. Part of the old family farm was out on the Mizzen Road, Corranbeg. The house is there now. It's a beautiful white double house. But it just so happened to be a year of the worst weather in living memory. And I think my grandmother, having had some of the luxuries, whatever they would have been, of London at the time, kind of went through the winter and thought, yeah, I'm not doing this anymore. So they went back to London. Otherwise, I suppose my mother would have been born here. Been a very different story, I guess. That's how we come to be here. And for as long as we can keep it running, we will.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in West London, a place called Greenford, not far from Ealing. It's just average London suburbia, really. I still live not far from there. My parents, or my mother, my dad died 2012, but my mother still lives down there, so I'm not far away. So it's that support system, we support each other. That's how she'll put it.
What did your mum and dad do?
Dad worked for Iveco it's a quality assurance I think they were part of Ford at one point, and they made lorries.
Yeah, in one of the companies that I managed, we had a fleet of Iveco trucks.
Well, he was quality assurance for those.
Yeah.
And he's stopping working. He ended up being medically retired because he just wasn't well enough really to work. Happened to coincide with the closure of the British plant. They kind of regrouped and took everything back to Europe. But he was well supported. They looked after him. Mum worked for BHS, the British Home Stores, doing all sorts of jobs and sort of worked her way up to manager. And then as Dad got iller and iller, back down again to Saturday staff at the end, I suppose, that sort of thing, part-time, so that she could care for him. So I think a lot of my childhood was in a caring environment, because I think I was 5 or 6 when Dad first went down with diabetes. But I think he's quite unusual, and he ended up with almost all of the side effects that you could get. They could list off, you could lose your sight, you could have amputations, you could have heart problems, you could have kidney failure, you could have, we'll sign up for them all. We'll have all
the
that.
boxes.
Let's have some of all of that, please. So where most people can kind of work on for quite a long time and hopefully manage their lives and it works really well, he just wasn't that lucky. So
growing up in a house with a sick parent must have been a fairly stressful thing, was it?
No, not really, because it was normal. It's what's normal for a particular person. My grandmother lived with us from here, so it was a crowded house. Good band, that band.
We now have a soundtrack for the podcast.
Yeah, 4 seasons in one day describes this place perfectly, doesn't it? Yeah, so we had my grandmother living with us, and myself and my 2 brothers, and the dog. The dog always gets a mention. He was a legend.
They always do.
Yeah, they do, don't they? He was a bit of a legend in his own time, that dog.
What was his name?
Jet. It was...
what a great name for a dog.
Well, he was named after... I don't know this bit of the history. Apparently there was a racing greyhound, I think from Skull, called Parktown Jet. And I think that's where the name came from.
Wasn't Joan Jett in the Blackhearts? He was probably before her, was he?
Oh, he's after her.
Oh, was he after her?
So.
Okay.
Not that old. I don't know Joan Jett, but it sounds like something from the 60s to me.
No. 80s. I'm guessing it was 80s.
Oh, no, it's simultaneous then. He was around.
He could have been.
He came in as a puppy. He was staying a day.
So either a female American rock singer or...
I'm not sure what he was.
Or from the Skull Connection.
I think it was the Skull Connection. He was half Whippet, we think, half Labrador. And in his early years, he looked like a Whippet. And in his older years, he looked like a coffee table. Sort of the legs of a whippet and this tiny little head and this kind of barrel of a body. And he was just notorious locally. He would get up to all sorts of mischief, and people would kind of turn up at the door and bring him back. And, just a very naughty dog. But the kind of dog you should have when you're a child, the kind of dog that people write stories about.
The Adventures of Jet.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, maybe that's one for the future.
There's a book in that. That's another one for your list, Mike.
I'll add that one to the pile.
Yeah.
Yeah, the multifarious adventures of Jet. Yeah, that'll be good.
It's a good way to get to know the people in the neighbourhood, having a dog.
It is. I really miss it because I live in a flat over in London. I don't have a dog because I just feel that you have to have a garden. I wouldn't want to have a pet and not have space outside for them. At school where I teach, we have 4 or 5 dogs that come in with staff. Sometimes 1 or 2 of them are in every day. But that's lovely because you get the best of all worlds, You go and have lunchtime with Leo, the dog, or Rodney, or Hugo Boss, the dog, obviously. But then there's Kevin and there's a couple of others. I can't remember the names. But there's always a dog around. And that's quite nice. It's great for the kids too because it teaches them. A lot of our kids are frightened of dogs. Culturally they've grown up in West London, often from ethnic minority groups, and they're not used to having dogs. So they're always a bit nervous.
I'd say they're nearly all flatland, are they? In many cases, so the circumstances, it's not the typical 3-bedroom house with a garden out the back with many of them, I'm guessing.
Oh, if only. That would be luxury if that's what they had. A lot of them it's horrible. A lot of them are in very difficult situations, housing-wise. We've got numerous families that are living in B&Bs, or what they call, I love the Tories, what they call houses of multiple occupancy, where you get a room in that house and you share a bathroom and you share a kitchen. But what they'll do is put a family with 3 kids into one room. And, upstairs there might be an alcoholic or a drug dealer. I'm not saying that these people don't need places to go. Of course they do. But the way that they group them together isn't thought through. So it's very challenging. So it's very normal to have kids coming in who, may not have slept or haven't had food because there's no money for food, or inappropriately dressed. They have, haven't got coats or, whatever it might be. So we're often running around feeding and saying, right, okay, you're going to go and have a kip now. We're going to do some work. You're going to go and sleep. And
so to use the word teaching doesn't really describe the role.
No, it's not what it... I've been teaching 24 years. It's not what it was.
Yeah.
It's horrible. I like the kids. I like the staff. I don't like the job at all. It's just horrible because I've always felt that if you can't look after the kids and you can't look after the pensioners, what are you doing? You look after the people where the most needs are first. And okay, that's a bit of a generalisation. There are other people who've got needs as well. But if you can't look after those who can't look after themselves, what does that say about you as a country? And these last sort of 13, 14 years of Tory government have just been horrid. They've cut unnecessarily, they've cut ideologically, they've created so much red tape that you can't do your job. And in the last sort of 4 or 5 years, they've now really liberated the right and the right wing and the far right, and people who, will stand up and say things that just 5-6 years ago people wouldn't have dreamt of saying in public. And now we've got politicians saying it and TV personalities, and it's just so toxic. It's horrible, absolutely horrible. And that has a huge impact on what we do at work, has a huge impact on our kids. Some years ago, the Tory government brought in a thing called Prevent for us to identify students who are at risk of radicalisation. And it happens. We have had 1 or 2. Ironically, it's not been from the areas of society where the right would say it would be. It is the right. They are the ones that are causing the radicalisation. And it's very, very toxic.
Your kids are all special needs kids, right?
All special needs, yeah.
Is it a special needs school?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're a secondary school. We've got 230 odd kids, ranging in needs from autism through to moderate and severe learning disability. And so there's a wide range of needs. But the one thing is, I could say honestly that they're all brilliant. They're all fantastic people. They're all very genuine, big-hearted, caring, and the families on the whole are wonderful too. We're in a part of London that is extremely ethnically diverse. And I think it's wonderful. I love it. And, we'll have our Muslim families coming in or our Hindu families coming in or our Sikh families. I don't care who they are. They all have the same sort of wants and needs for their kids. But they're very community-minded. In some respects, some of them remind me quite a lot of my time here as a child. There's a sense of community.
When did you come here first? What's your earliest memory of it?
Oh, I was 4 years old.
Yeah. You told me an unusual story about that visit.
I sort of, very bizarrely, pretty much navigated up from Skull, I think it was, or certainly from Goleen to here. I just knew the way. It was weird. But then I've always felt very, very at home here.
How was here described to you by your mum? Obviously, you're growing up in London and all of that experience and everything.
I don't know that it was ever described as such.
And were you Irish? Would you have been identified as being an Irish family? I know you were born in England.
I suppose not really. Partly because of the way that I speak. I've got voice of the BBC. But I think the schools that I went to, there was a lot of Irish people. They had the Irish name, whereas my name's not Irish. And so we weren't thought of as Irish. But I suppose on a sliding scale, when I talk to people over, I suppose that's what they associate me with now. Whether that's me associating myself with Ireland or whether it's just because I spend so much time here or I don't know.
What was it to you? Obviously, you experienced it as a 4-year-old. Was that your first connection to the place? Or were you connected before that?
Connected before. From a very, very early age, as soon as we could draw or write, we were writing back and forth to Great Aunt Nora. She's up there on the wall with Mike sitting at that fireplace there.
Wow.
She was a fantastic knitter. She, from memory, would just be able to knit these most amazing patterns and jumpers. So I think
your jumper is lovely.
Well, yeah.
But Mike isn't wearing a jumper.
I'm not wearing
again.
a jumper.
That was just a joke.
But my mother still got a lot of the things that she knitted. They're beautiful, beautiful things. And so we were constantly writing back and forth. And so I suppose when you come over as a 4-year-old, the ice is broken. There's none of that kind of like hiding and being slightly frightened. We were all straight in here, and it was, again, it was just normal because it was just what it was.
From London suburbia to here.
The freedom, oh God.
Yeah, we did a comparison of our ages. So that trip as a 4-year-old was a long time ago, before these areas were populated by any tourists or anything like that. So what did you come to? What did you experience?
Cattle. Obviously, I experienced cattle before then. I say obviously because most kids these days have them. But cattle there, literally outside. And so you'd be outside and the cattle would be around you kind of thing. The old horse. We had an old horse, Paddy. And the old carts that Mike used to milk the cattle in the morning and put churns on the back of the cart and take them down to the creamery at the bottom of the road. Locally, there were cars and things like that, but there were far more horses and donkeys, and people, go down to Mass on a Sunday and tractors would come down and people on the back of their carts. And yeah, it's a very different place now.
Yeah.
I've never really thought of it before. But yeah, it is a very different place.
And what did you do? I presume you were coming for a few weeks at a time.
We came for 2 weeks at a time at least, I think, yeah. What didn't you do? So we had the freedom. So we were out across the land and up the hills and off and away and out all day, more or less. Obviously, there were places like Barley Cove. And back then, there were lots of old cousins and things around. So my grandmother would be with us. So we'd go off for a day up to Bantry to see someone, or, get dragged out to see some random uncle or aunt or something like that. But no, it was just...
Did you love it?
Loved it, yeah. I think we all did. I think the thing for us was the freedom of it, growing up in suburban London. Even back then, we had quite a lot of freedom back then. I still think that a lot of the freedom that kids don't get these days is not based on reality. I think it's based on fear. And I think you're as likely to get robbed or murdered in London as you probably were 60 years ago. It's just that the press have cottoned on that it's a very good way to sell copy. And so they...
clickbait.
yeah, it's pre-internet clickbait, really, wasn't it, I suppose? So everyone's, I can't let the child out because they might get abducted, and you're like, well, there's probably not going to be, are they? It's not likely. But it's that perception and that fear. But the freedom, I can remember going up the famine village before it was all restored. We used to sit up there and, just getting up to all sorts, just relaxing. And so, yeah, it's always been there in my head and in my blood, I suppose. And I do feel very connected to it.
Yeah, and more than anyone else in the family, I gather.
I think so. My mother and I feel very connected to it. My older brother's not particularly interested, I don't think. My younger brother came back last year with his wife and my nephew. They loved it, but he hadn't been back in over 12, 13, 14 years. So hopefully they'll come more. They leave him instructions for the brush cutter and explanations of where all the tools are so we can do some work whilst he's here. But no, I'm here all the time. So the joy of teaching is we do get breaks. There'll be people screaming at this now going, you get breaks, you're on holiday all the time. Come and have a go if you think you're hard enough is all I'm going to say. If you want to come and do my job, please do.
Your path to teaching, was that what you always wanted to do, or
no,
were there a few twists and turns along the way?
Quite a few.
Yeah.
I started off leaving uni, musical instrument making degree at university. I started off working for a company called Pilgrim Harps over in the UK. Fantastic company, but I just couldn't make it pay. I was spending more probably driving to and from the workshops. I was in Ealing, they were in South Godstone in Surrey. So, spending hours on the M25, probably 120-mile round trip daily. And so I did it for a year, but just couldn't make it work. So I went and sat on a checkout at Sainsbury's for a little bit.
How did you end up instrument making? Where did that come from?
That came, as I say, this is I don't know. I heard a piece of music, I think it was mid-80s, late 80s. And whatever the instrument was, I loved it. And it wasn't so much the instrument itself, it was more the music, I think. Turned out to be a piece of O'Carolan music. And it was played on a harp, though at the time I hadn't worked that one out. It was played on an old Irish harp. And I thought, well, whatever that is, I'm going to have one of those. So the sleeve notes of the record were all in Irish. So I had to go into the library and get a dictionary out and work out what it all was. Oh, it's a harp, right? Okay, well, I'll get one of those because I was already playing piano and bits and pieces like that. I've always been musical. I've always been able to sort of pick up an instrument and do something with it. So anyway, I found out it was a harp and then quite quickly realised that I couldn't afford a harp. That wasn't going to happen because they're very expensive. And so I thought, I'll make one.
As one does.
As one does. And I can remember going into the woodwork teacher who was from Derry, and he just thought this was the funniest thing he'd ever heard in his life. He was a condescending old... Anyway, less said about him the better. But I thought, no, you... Am I allowed to swear? I have sworn.
Of course I have.
Yeah, well,
Go on, go for it.
Anyway, I managed to track down some drawings.
There's nothing like encouraging your students, is there?
Yeah. Some people shouldn't be teachers.
Yeah. You've been teaching a long time. And,
yes, I do.
Yeah, so you've experienced a lot of people who should not be teaching.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It's very hard. I'm not the kind of person who can stand back and watch something done badly. And particularly if the kids that I'm working with are getting the raw deal because of it. So I've had to learn to sort of sit on my hands and let the powers do what they need to do. Because I think, you can meddle in it and you can sort of push it, but you make the situation worse than it is. But there are people that really ought not to get through. They shouldn't get through. And
is that a case, Mike, of, hey, 2 months off, 3 months off at the summer, a good Christmas break?
I suppose that's part of it. I think it's also things like somebody will go and do an English degree or a geography degree and they go, what do I do now? Oh, no, I'll teach. I've always felt that you shouldn't be able to go from uni to teaching. I've always felt you should have to be 25 or over. I didn't start in teaching until I was in my late 20s. And I had a bit more of an idea of things. I had a bit more of an idea of myself. I wasn't sort of jumping in because I didn't know what else to do. And I think there's a lot of that. And don't get me wrong, people who do that, some of them turn out to be fantastic teachers, absolutely brilliant teachers. But some of them don't.
And those characters that you're talking about, do they dislike teaching? And are they waiting for the end of May? So, at last, I get the perk now of the job, the 2 or 3 months of the good Christmas break.
End of May, you're lucky. End of July for us.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There will be some of that, I suppose.
Like, are they, these people that you're talking about, these teachers, are they unhappy with what they're doing, do you think?
Some of them would be, yeah. Some of them have no idea how bad they are.
Yeah, okay.
You know, you always meet people who, you know, are stumped and do not understand why people are saying, no, that's really not good enough, is it? But I'm brilliant. Like, are you? Well, that's not what I'm seeing. You know, show me your brilliance. That's what we want to see, but no. So, you know, but you get, I think it's the same as everything. It's just the impact is greater when you're in a school, because in a business you can kind of work around somebody. You can find ways around. But when somebody's in charge of a class, you can't just walk into that class and then start doing, because then you're really stepping on toes. And
it's really bad, though, if you think of those formative years of those children, you know, whether that's primary school or secondary school. And in primary school in particular, you've got that teacher for that year. Yeah. And if you've got a bad teacher when you're 7 or 8, which is a really important learning time, you know, hopefully that kid, you know, if they get a good teacher after, that can correct some of that. But that's incredibly damaging to that child, isn't it?
It could be. Fortunately, I don't think it is as much as it could be. The nature of the curriculum, particularly in things like English, maths and science over in the UK, is it's very repetitive, it's cyclical. So if you have a bad teacher and somebody doesn't get something across to you, the chances are you'll pick it up later.
Okay. So the system is built with safety nets.
Well, I hope that's not why it's done that way. I think it's designed because learning is cumulative and it builds up over time. But it does, you know, every school will have people. On the whole, I'm really lucky because the majority of the people I teach are brilliant and should be doing what they do, but far too many of the brilliant ones leave, you know, because they burn out. And income-wise, the income is good over. It's not bad at all, but it's very frustrating when you hear things like train drivers and tube drivers in London start on 60,000 a year when a teacher starts on 30. And you think, okay, you've got responsibility, but your train has a fail-safe. It points in one direction. You can't go wrong. And if you do go wrong, the computer kicks in and takes over. We don't get any of that. Yeah. And we have to study for 4 years to start teaching. So I've got 17, 18 years at university I've done. And I'm earning marginally more than a train driver. And you kind of go, is that right? It's the same, but it's the same with doctors and nurses. You know, there are people that are absolutely imperative to society, and I'm not suggesting that train drivers or anyone else isn't. But I do remember having an argument with the postman who was complaining that he was only earning 45,000 a year. So what do you do? Oh, well, I pick up the mail, I sort it as I walk, and then I go home. Right.
Yeah, but it's pissing out of the heavens a lot of the time, Mike. And it's very cold.
I know, because I'm on playground duty. I'm teaching PE outside, or you know.
So come on, the harp maker to the teacher. Give me that journey.
When I left the harp company, I temporarily went and worked for Sainsbury's, sitting on a checkout. I'd done some work for them as a student, so I just sort of rang them up and said, "Do you need anyone?" And kind of went in there. And then went to work.
That was before scanning.
No. Scanners were around.
Oh, were they?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. I can't say they were very good. Definitely before self-scanning.
Yeah.
You know, those checkouts that sort of talk to you as you go through. I'm sure I heard one of them say resistance is futile recently. Scanning, resistance is futile. But
it's a conspiracy.
Yes. Don't start. I don't wash with any of that. So I went from there to Debenhams, another company that's gone, up at head office doing distribution, buying and merchandising, women's wear, which I did for about 18 months, and I just hated it. It was not my scene. And I never really understood what it was I was trying to do. Never really got my head around it. So I decided, because I really loathed working there, that I would never do a job again that I hated.
That's a good life tip.
Yeah, well, I got that one early. There's got to be something you like about what you do, otherwise just don't do it.
But you're messing with your precious time.
Oh, it's my time, not theirs.
Yeah.
They may be paying me for it, but ultimately it's my life.
And you write a big check if you do something you don't like. I don't care how much they pay you. If you're doing something you don't like, that is a huge check that you're writing for yourself. You know.
It's very true. I've never thought of it like that, but you're right. So anyway, I did 18 months there, and as I was sort of getting to the end, I think it was at the point where they were going to say, right, you need to go. And I was at the point where I said, I want to go. So I got there before they did.
With the skin in your teeth.
Skin in my teeth. And I decided, what don't I know about? What do I need? What should I do? I thought, well, I know nothing about finance, and that'd probably be quite a useful thing to have. So I applied for a credit control, sort of junior credit control role, and went and worked for a catering equipment company. Very dysfunctional place, brilliant boss. My boss was fantastic. She was amazing. We'd sit in the corner. We shared an office, and she'd be sitting there, sort of chain smoking. Like, you're not supposed to smoke in here. She'd say, yeah, I know. But really good at her job, and I learned a lot from her.
Credit control is stressful, so...
Well, I learned how it shouldn't be stressful.
Yeah, okay.
She was very good at it not being stressful. And I suppose I was there for a couple of years. And I just wanted to... The next thing I decided I wanted to do was I wanted to work in central London because I missed the social life that came with being in central London. So I went to do credit control for Addison Lee, the courier firm, the minicab company, which was brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I did it for a year, literally 1 year to the day. I can remember going in, and I think there were 4 of us on the team, and I was a new member, and within about 2 weeks, 2 of the team had left. I was like, my God, what have I done? And the boss came to me and said, no, that's brilliant. That's exactly what we wanted. It's like, you could have told me that beforehand, because I'd sort of driven them out. But we then put together a team, and it was lovely because there was no leader, no boss in that team, just 4 of us working together. And it worked so well. There's that whole thing of having equitable status. There's nobody pushing or bullying. You just know what you need to do and you do it. And lots of good social life with it too. And the old managing director would come up once a day and where are we at? What's the figures? Any problems? Do you need me to get on the phone to anyone? I can remember him getting on the phone to the Millennium Dome. They'd run up over 100 grand's worth of minicabs. Imagine that, 100 grand's worth of minicabs. And we were always a bit wary of them because they always looked like they were about to go down. And the government always put a bit more money in, and it was all very hand to mouth. And he rang up and said, look, unless you send us a cheque immediately, we'll send you a bike, we'll pick the cheque up, we're closing your account. Oh, well, you don't know who you're talking to. We are the Millennium Dome. That's fine. Stop. And about 5 minutes later, the phones went blue. And 10 minutes later, there's a bike coming with a cheque. But it was great because it was working for a company that really knew its stuff. So I learned a lot about people. I learned a lot about tricky situations. I learned a lot about dealing with stress. I learned a lot about customers and customer service, something I think that we need to be bringing into schools more and more. So we need to train our teachers in because we are, unfortunately, in a retail environment now. That's what the government have created, and we're having to compete. I absolutely adored working there, but I had done a couple of school holidays.
Oh, we have a visitor.
A tortoiseshell butterfly, I think that is it, something like that. I'd done a couple of holidays with a friend who was a teacher, adventure holidays with his kids, which I absolutely enjoyed. Loved it to bits. Take a week off work and go and do those. And so I thought, I'll give teaching a try. Applied, went back, did the PGCE, hated it. But once I got my own classroom and shut the door, it's your own little domain. You get to work with the kids. They're very funny. Sometimes very challenging, but that in itself is a good thing. It keeps you on your toes.
So standing in front of those kids for the first time that first day, how did you feel?
Fine. It didn't feel unusual. It didn't feel different. It just felt normal.
You found what you were looking for in a way?
Yeah. I still don't know what that is. No, I do. I think I do know what it is. It's variety. I'd hate to be in a job where it's the same thing every day. Or, even Addison Lee. Addison Lee was fun because of the social life. But it was the same cycle. Every month you did exactly the same thing, month in, month out. It's very easy, but you could see how it would very quickly grind you down. And I was looking for something where there's a variety all the time. And no 2 days are the same in teaching.
Yeah, and that's important. Again, we're talking about, we're on the Win Happy podcast, and even what you do on a daily basis. If it's Groundhog Day every day, you're killing yourself.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of people don't have the luxury of changing, and we need people to, in many cases, punch in the same thing every day. And if you're content with that, that's good. But you're kind of killing yourself if you're going to do that for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, whatever that looks like.
And unless you've got that happiness somewhere else, that must be really awful.
That's a sentence.
Well, isn't it? Because if you hate your job and you've got nothing in your life that makes you happy, oh my God, what's the point? And happiness. What is happiness? I don't.
I'm going to ask you that at the end.
Are you? I'll hold off on that then.
If you want to go for it too, go on.
I don't know.
What's happiness? Come on, Mike.
I don't think happiness is a realistic thing. You can't be happy all the time. That'd be silly. There'd be something almost wrong with you, wouldn't there? Because life wouldn't be touching you. But I think happiness is contentness. I don't think it's this kind of walking around with a huge grin on your face with a skip in your step and just, there's something quite false about that. But I think it's about contentness, about happiness with what you have, happiness with who you are, and knowing who you are, knowing what you want, and having a plan of sorts. I don't mean, I've got a plan in 5 years' time I want to do this, or in 10 years' time I want that to have happened. But having a direction. I think that's what I mean. Contentness and direction.
How did the writing start?
The writing came off the back of my master's and PhD. I fell in love with the process of writing. It took a while. I always thought my English was quite good. My written English was quite good, but it was not at all. But Lewis Jones, my PhD supervisor, who was also my MA supervisor and my degree supervisor, so I've known Lewis since the early 90s, is a fantastic teacher. He's a fantastic editor. He's a fantastic writer. And he's got all the right things in all the right places. It's infinitely patient. Most people would get really annoyed if you're trying to, let's have a look at adjectival constructs again, But he was really great. And I suppose I learnt the process through hard work, but a lot of the hard work was his. Most Friday nights I'd go up to uni because I was teaching full time. I couldn't go to uni during the day. So we had this sort of arrangement where I'd go up on a Friday at about 4:30, 5 o'clock straight from school over to East London. And we'd go through stuff that I'd written, and he'd go through with a fine-tooth comb with me and go, is that what you meant to say? Have you got your comma in the right place? Think about it. This sentence is passive. Shouldn't it be active? And I learned through him how to do it. I'm not as good as he is, but I can write now. And the process of crafting a good sentence or a good paragraph or a good page of work, so nice. And you read it back and you go, yeah, it's really good, and it's good. And so I suppose when I finished the PhD, I was kind of like itching. It's like, well, I've done that. What's next? And so that's when the folklore thing came along, the idea of the novel. And I think I've already mentioned finding the schools collection at the National Folklore Collection.
Yeah, no, we haven't got there. So
we haven't got there.
Combining your new love of writing and your passion for Ireland. So and this, I guess, in a way, was our starting conversation when I was introduced to you down in O'Mara's pub in Goleen on a Thursday night with the most amazing collection of musicians, the bodhrán player, the fiddle player.
Banjo.
Yeah, the few young bucks and their acoustic guitars, and doing everything from oldie Irish songs to, Simon and Garfunkel and whatever else. And the young lad who rocks up and starts singing, I'm a creep, I'm a weirdo, the Radiohead song.
Oh, I think maybe I'd gone by that point.
That's Stephen. There was someone saying to me, yeah, he loves singing that song and it's so good for him to be able to do that. And okay. I passed Stephen a few times. I passed him on the beach the other day. I said, Stephen, will you be singing the song on Thursday? I suppose I will. Only in West Cork.
By popular demand.
So the books.
I suppose the writing, the initial idea, after having spent quite a long time, nearly 10 years between the Masters and PhD, writing non-fiction, writing history, I suppose, I really wanted to try and see if I could do something that was fiction-based. And I had some ideas around where I wanted to start. And I'm not going to give the story away because it may happen one day. Probably won't, but it may. But it's based in landscape and folklore.
I think need to make a commitment to the listeners. Come on,
I'm not going to do that.
Oh, say it out loud. Say it out loud.
It's not going to happen because at the moment, it's a sort of, it happens, I might touch it once a week or once a month and I'll add a line or I'll write something or a paragraph or even a chapter sometimes will come out. But I don't know where the story's going. And I think I've written about 8 or 9 chapters and I don't know how they link together yet. But they do, they will. I'm pretty confident of that.
So I've heard the word confident. This is good. We're progressing here, Mike.
Well, it's got to be right, and I've got to be happy with it, but it's also got to be something that a publisher would be interested in. And you never know what they're interested in. And there's a whole other process that I've got to learn about approaching a publisher and seeing whether or not they would, how do you pitch to a publisher? Probably courses you can go on for that. I'm sure there are. The idea was to write a novel based loosely in the folklore of Ireland, particularly the folklore of West Cork, where the landscape is a big part of the character. So, funnily enough, the opening chapter came from something that happened here some years ago. I'd been over for half term, I think it was October or something, I was on my own. And I was due to go back up to the airport this particular afternoon. It was sort of getting dark, the weather was pretty rough. And I thought, right, better start loading the car. So I opened up the door, went out, started loading the car. And I came in and there was a robin in here. It took me 45 minutes to get the robin out because I thought, I can't leave it, So by this time, I've just left enough skin of teeth time to get to the airport. So, lock up the house, open the car door, bloody robin gets in the car. I thought, okay, now you're taking the proverbial piss. So I thought, fine, you're coming to Cork then, matey. Yeah. So I opened up the windows and I drove up the drive to the top cross and got down to the bottom cross where you go onto the Barley Cove Road, and he decided that was enough for him and off he went. But the robin...
Nice knowing you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks for the ride. I've saved my little wings. But the robin then became a character in the story. And I suppose the idea is... looking back at all of those characters from mythology and from legend and supernatural, what happens? What if they are real? Because I know there are people... Oh, hello, butterfly's back. It's just telling me something. I know there are people... I know people here that genuinely believe in puka and all these things. It's not my place to tell them they're wrong. Because if they're wrong, then every other religion in the world is wrong. It's not a religion as such, but it's a belief. And it's not my place to challenge that. And I thought, what if they are? What if it is real? But what if, for some reason, they've been sort of frozen into the form of animals? So that's where the robin comes in as the narrator of the story. Spoilers, you don't find out he's a robin until quite a way in. You just think he's a narrator. So it sort of came from that. And then, the idea that the landscape is alive with all these animals. There's a poem that was written by a guy from Skull. It's in the Mizzen folklore book. It's called The Amalgamation of the Workhouses. Really exciting title, obviously. There's a butterfly just flying around us at the moment, just listening in. I want to be in the book. All right, you're in. Yeah, The Amalgamation of the Workhouses. It's such a clever poem. The idea being that the workhouses were going to be amalgamated, some were going to be closed down. And obviously that was going to have a negative impact on some people. Some people used the workhouses when things got tough financially. Some used them for healthcare. Some used them for end of life, childbirth, all that sort of thing. They were all, although it wasn't a particularly pleasant service, it was a free service, although free in the sense that you had to work for it. So the poem is about all of the local birds meeting to discuss the closure. And you've got, I think, the eagles at the top of the tree and the owl, and they're all the different birds are sitting in the tree talking about what's going to happen and where are we going to look for the next crumb. It's so clever, so clever. And it really grabbed me as sort of fitting in with this idea of landscape and animals and birds in the tree. And then I thought, how do you tie all that together? And then I thought, hang on a minute, the idea that there is somebody who has an overarching control of all the local folklore. So that's where the idea of the folklorist comes in, who has control, and the control of the folklore is passed down the line of the family, the female line in the family. And what happens in this at the beginning of the book is the folklorist dies and has no descendants. So the folklore, the magic, if you like, the control is lost. And so things begin to happen. And, both good and bad. And there's retribution in the village for certain people who perhaps it was coming for. And that's the sort of gist of it.
Okay.
And I'm quite happy with what I've written so far. But it may never see the light of day.
Come on, Michael.
We'll see. I need to finish, because the other book I've got, at the moment, I'm just nearly finished a book on the folklore of the Beara Peninsula.
Yeah, so in 1937, someone had this amazing initiative. I think it was the responsibility of the Irish Folklore Commission.
That's right.
Does that entity even exist? Is that an entity? Or it was obviously at that time?
It was an entity. It's now, the collection is the National Folklore Collection, University College Dublin. They are still collecting. They're very open about people using their resources. I made contact with them and said, look, how do you feel about some of this being published and reproduced? Oh, absolutely, go for it. Just send us a copy. This is a great idea. Yeah,
so in 1937, someone had the idea that we're going to ask school kids effectively.
Well, you've got to think, how can you... The recognition was that under British rule, hundreds and hundreds of years of British rule, which had seriously oppressed the Gaelic culture, how do you capture what's left of that? It's every generation that you lose, you're losing more of it, and you need to do something quite quickly. So it was the birth of the Irish Free State, which I think is 1937, though it wasn't ratified until the end of the 40s, that somebody said, look, we've got to do something about this. This is important. This is part of who we are. This is part of what Ireland is. And who is it that's going to do that? Do you employ people to go out to the local villages with tape recorders? Do you, ask people to send you letters? All of that's going to be very hit and miss because you can't get coverage. And one of the few ways you can is tell the schools to do it. And so...
You writers automatically, granted they're kids.
Yeah.
So off you go, boys and girls, capture these stories for us.
And, I think certainly today, if you were to sit down with somebody and say, tell me about, I don't know, the folklore of whatever, they may tell you about it, but they may not. I've certainly had that experience with people, some things they don't want to talk about. That's fair. Whereas kids sitting down with a parent or grandparent, oh, absolutely, yeah, I'll tell you all about that. So you get an openness in that relationship, that family relationship, or even the neighbourhood relationship that those children were dipping into in order to collect all sorts of information. So it's, everything from how butter was made or how bees were kept, through to local cures, through to local supernatural stories, explanations of place names, all sorts. And it's rich. It's really rich because it's still here. The places are still here.
So we have this collection, and yet it takes an Englishman to trip over it and make a decision. I'm going to collect some of this about this place that I'm hugely connected to, called The Mizzen. So that was the first book. Now, where did that come from? How did you even... Oh, yeah, that was a good idea, Mike. How did you come up with it?
Again, because I wanted to write the folklore. I wanted to write the novel. I thought if I immerse myself in the folklore, that's going to give me something sort of that I can hold on to, that I can fall back on. And there's my part of my research. And I'd obviously learned the research skills and the writing skills. So putting together a book was relatively easy. For the most part, it's transcription. I write an introduction, but I'm not editing what was written as part of the collection. What those kids wrote down in Goleen in 1937 under Bat O'Mara, Jim O'Mara's father, is what went in the book.
Yeah, but you compiled it, you structured it,
compiled it and structured it. Yeah, and because what they did in 1937 is they gave some guidance. So they said to the schools, like, find out about local games that kids play, find out about farming traditions, find out about local foods, find out about what happened during the famine, find out about. So they gave them all these headings. So I sort of took and used some of those headings to structure the book, and then went from school to school effectively through the collection. So I started off, I think down here I started off with Crook Evans School, then out to Lissy Griffin, down to Goleen, and all the way through to Ballady Hob.
And in a way, it's the exact initiative that was needed to bring that work from 1937 to life.
Well, I think, yeah, maybe. But I think also around the same time, other people have been sort of dipping in. And I've certainly, maybe I've noticed it because I've been working with it. And maybe people have been talking about it for a long time. But you do see it referenced in podcasts, radio, TV. Yeah,
but you're tapping into the particular location where people are either visiting or they're connected to in some way or they're living, obviously.
The irony was, at the point of doing it, I didn't really think about selling the book. That wasn't part. A penny hadn't dropped. That's what you're supposed to do. But it's done really well down here.
And it's got the support very, very quickly of some of the bookstores. I know Worm Books inside in Skull, they're big supporters of yours.
Yeah, it's never out of stock there.
But they get it. They get that this is what people who come and visit this beautiful place are from here. This is what they're interested in. They get their customer.
I think part of that is also, yes, Worm definitely get their customer. The books that they sell, the curation of what they sell is fantastic. For such a small store, I love what they have because there's always something. A lot of stores you go into and it's the same generic old stuff. No, Jer knows what he's doing. With the folklore book, I think part of the connection is that in the National Folklore Collection, where a child had written a story down, they would then write down who they were, where they lived, who they collected it from, their age. And so you can go through and, there's people I've spoken to in the village whose great-grandfather or grandfather have written something, or, it's about their townland that they're, and so you're taking something that was abstract and putting it into a place where it isn't.
And connecting with the people who live here, who had their forefathers and foremothers, which is amazing. So we have Mizzen, we have Skibbereen, and Beara is the next one. And then, of course, we're going to have the king of all books.
Well, no, that's not the next one.
No, it's in the queue. It's in the queue.
Yeah. The book that will probably come out before all of them, I hope, is the history and folklore of the Gaelic harp.
So, the harp maker who couldn't make it work because of...
He found it to make a different way.
Because of a 120-mile commute every day. So, where we are, there's a beautiful old harp sitting in the window. Tell me the story of that harp. It's quite amazing.
That is a 30-string. It would have been called at the time a clarsach. Irish word for harp. It was made probably in the 1890s in London, South Kensington, by a maker called Morley, John George Morley. The Morleys were the successors to the biggest harp making enterprise probably ever, the Erard firm that were based in Paris and London from about 1790 and through to 1917 when they closed in London and much later in Paris. When Erard closed in London in the 1890s, old Mr. Morley bought the stock and goodwill of the business and started making himself. So that was made by him. It's very clearly an Irish harp. It's a close sort of imitation of what John Egan was doing in Dublin in the early 19th century. John Egan is the maker of, you will see online, in museums, in adverts, a green harp with lots of shamrocks on it. That's John Egan. So what old Mr. Morley was doing was trying to do something that was similar. And that's one of those. I've had that a couple of years, and it's been sitting. I've got, in my living room, there's, I think, 15 harps of different sizes and shapes at the moment.
So how did you lay your hands on it?
eBay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In fact, I was here when I bought it. But that was a very good find. It belonged to a harpist in North London. She'd had it many years. She's retired. As you can see, this doesn't work on podcast, but I'll describe it. The soundboard, which is the front of the harp through which the strings pass, has broken. Now, what I need to do, which I'll probably start doing tomorrow, is taking it apart bit by bit and then very carefully lifting the soundboard off. Ordinarily, that soundboard would go in the bin and it'd be replaced by a new one. But I think I've got a way of repairing it. So I'm going to try. Because it's decorated. It's painted in
the
gold and green foliage and shamrocks again. It's a bit sort of full on. It's not as full on as the Egan harps.
It's beautiful. And are they dogs at the bottom? Are they tigers? I'm just looking.
I don't know. Yeah. I can't remember. Oh, rams. Is that a ram? Rams were quite common on harps. Don't ask me why.
Have a look. Is that a ferocious looking dog?
It's barking.
Yeah.
I think it's a mythical beast of some sort. It looks like a lion, but with horns, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Very typical of the age. But what I want to do with this one, some of them, when they're really old, the only thing you can do is completely strip and restart. But this is a dark green finish. It's crazed and it's damaged. But I think what I'm going to do is consolidate it, carefully touch up any missing bits, but not try to make it modern. Just leave it like that.
And then there's another harp.
This one behind me. I bought this. This was for me. This is a present to me. I didn't make this one. This is a Pilgrim Harps. I used to work for Pilgrim. This is the company that I worked for. But I promised myself one many, many years ago. They're lovely. This is made in Surrey. And it's got a very big, bright tone. And
it's a big sound off it.
It's got a big sound, yeah. It's a modern version of this little green Morley, really. Much chunkier, much higher tension, but a nice harp. And I used to play a lot more. I barely play at all now. I last played properly just a year gone. In fact, it was this weekend a year ago for a friend's wedding. So I was here for a month beforehand, or a couple of weeks at least beforehand. So I spent a good sort of 2 or 3 hours every day just practicing till I could do it again. Because although your brain remembers, your hands can't quite do what they could do. And so you start playing and it just sounds awful. But
yeah, so before we started recording, you told me you had a medley ready to...
That's such a lie.
A medley of ancient Irish folklore songs.
I will try and play something, but I'm really, really, really not a harpist and I'm really rusty.
Okay, the deal is, Mike, we can kill it from the recording if you decide. So
that sounds
you
fair.
Go for it.
I'll do something. That's all you're getting.
It's a beautiful song.
It's a lovely, lovely harp. And because I used to work for them, they did me a little deal on it, let's just say.
So they still like you?
They still like me. They're selling my book for me. It's very good at them. They didn't have to. They don't sell books. And I think over the years, they'll come to me if there's something. My specialism, I suppose, because of my master's and PhD, is 19th century London-made pedal harps. They're the big concert harps. And there were 20-odd makers in London between 1797 and, really the end of the 1800s. And so I'm very good at going in and going, that is this, you need to do that. So they'll call me occasionally if they get something strange that they don't understand or they've not seen before. Or just because it's an interesting harp and they think that I might like to see it. So, and equally, there are times that I'll go down and say, I've got this problem with this, I don't know what to do. And they'll go, oh, you need this. So there's a sort of nice back and forth communication. It's that connection thing again, isn't it?
So you're harp making now?
Yes. I don't have a workshop. I'm reliant on the goodwill of the woodwork teacher at school to use his workshop. It used to be my workshop, but I don't teach woodwork anymore. So I do still make, so I'm maybe making one or two a year. I made one for cousins who live just behind us here. A couple of Christmases ago, they wanted one for the grandkids. So I made something similar to that, actually. Something similar. I'm pointing at the green one. Sorry, I should be clear about that. I keep forgetting that you can't see people listening to a podcast. So I made them something of that sort of size. And the grandkids are really enjoying it, I think. In fact, they're around, so they might come up. I've said to come up later and they can have a go on this and,
You're an interesting man, Mike. You have a lot of things going on. The house, there's no TV. Mike is here on his Todd. You're obviously good with, I won't say solitude, maybe that is the word, I'm not sure. But you're good on your own. Most people listening mightn't get that. Or, how does that work? I'd be very lonely or whatever. I would say that.
Oh no, I'd be the opposite.
Were you always like that? Were you always like, I want my own time?
I think I've always been quite self-sufficient and quite independent.
Yeah.
I love silence. And you sort of get that here sometimes.
Kind of.
Sometimes it's just a storm. But even that, I suppose it's that naturalness that I really miss when I'm in London. When you go to bed at night, you can hear the cars. Funnily enough, a student I taught many, many years ago, a special needs student, said to me one day, I used to teach in a woodland at school. I'm not doing less of that stuff now, but we had a 2-acre woodland adjacent to the school, and I do a lot of teaching out there and climbing trees and lighting fires and that sort of thing. We'd not long had the woods, and we went over with this particular lad, and he said, I can hear the sea. I looked at him and thought, are you mad? And right behind our woods is the A40 running in and out of London. It's sort of effectively a motorway. And I stopped and just stopped thinking and thought, no, he's right. Because it's the flow of the traffic. It sounds a bit like waves going in and out. So sometimes at night I have to sort of persuade myself that Andre was right, that I'm listening to waves, not cars. But I do really crave that connection to nature. Whether it be here or anywhere, I'm far more comfortable when I'm surrounded by greenery. If I can see the horizon, so much the better. It's one of the things I hate about London is that you can't see horizons. There's always something in the way. And you kind of sit here and you look at the sky and you think, the sky is amazing. London never has skies like this. And then you go, oh, it does. You just can't see it. You just can't see it.
Is this your home now, Mike?
It would be, yeah. I'm not ready to do it yet. And, it's obviously, that's a sort of big family conversation that would need to be had too at some point. My brothers will obviously interested and have their take on the place. But I'd live out here, whether it be here or somewhere else out here. I'd quite happily live out here. I suppose what I've been trying to do between the harp making, the writing, the teaching, and a bit of kitchen making now, is get to a point where I can have lots of strings.
To your bow.
Yeah, well, to my harp.
Yeah.
So that I can, grow and shrink back different parts of what I do for a living so that I can earn my living off different things. I'm 50. I can't see myself teaching at 55. Physically, it's getting too challenging. And, the moment my retirement age will be 67, and I can't imagine even beginning to do what I do at 67. Some of the behaviour is so physical, and you find yourself in situations where you're having to restrain some very big people, young men and women, and you will get hurt. And the older I get, the less I can see myself doing it. So I'm not saying there's a 5-year plan, there's not, but I'm sort of building up towards something that gets me out of the classroom.
What does winning look like for you?
What does winning look like for me? I think I am winning. I'm really happy with what I do. I love having this mix of writing and making and teaching and living. I think I've got it pretty good.
The way I talk about that at times, if you're a footballer, you might love playing football, but if there were no goalposts, it might become a little bit pointless after a while.
Yeah.
And, if you stick the ball into the back of the net, that moment of elation. Yes. So those moments for you, is that a book being completed? Is it a harp being made? What does that look like?
Oh, God, that sounds really sad, doesn't it? I don't think I get moments of elation. A harp finished or a book finished. It's just deep satisfaction.
Yeah, well, that's it really, isn't it? Finishing that book, Mike.
Not that book. Leave that one alone. That's going to another 10 years on it, maybe. And again, it goes back to that self-motivation and sort of being intrinsically driven and quite happy with solitude. I don't need to be validated. I'm really lucky. So, somebody could come along and go, oh, aren't you lucky? You've blah, 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 blah. It's like, when I remember finishing the PhD and everyone was like, oh, this is amazing, we should have a party. Why? You didn't do it.
Yeah.
It's for me, I don't need to mark it in that way. And it is a deep sense of satisfaction.
There you go.
Yeah.
I have one last question for you. This house.
Yes.
Is there a standout memory that you have about this house?
Oh, God. I suppose so, yeah. There's a couple, really. I can remember it must have been our first time here because it's myself and my older brother. My younger brother wasn't born. And my old uncle Mike, great uncle Mike, took us out one early evening up onto the hill opposite and just sat there and sort of showed us and pointed at everything. And that was a bit of a weird... I still remember that very distinctly. And sort of driving up the road where we sat, every time I drove up, I see where we sat. And it was just that sort of...
It's that top of the hill where you're looking down over Crookhaven, no?
No.
Just
literally opposite here, where the cattle normally are. Just go along and sit on the top of the rock and looking down towards the village, I suppose.
Okay.
And the other one is sort of Sunday lunch. Everyone's sitting around the table. The chicken a couple of hours before was running around outside. And
Not anymore.
Not anymore. Chicken's on the table with the stuffing, the big, always stuffed, the bread and onion stuffing, which was amazing. And I think it was always a sort of very warm place to come to. I remember my old aunt, great aunt Nora, after Mike had died, her husband, and Lizzie, her sister-in-law, and she was here alone in a wheelchair, remembering how content she was. The idea of leaving here just didn't cross her mind. It's not something she wanted to do. And I think my parents bought her a telly as a something to do, a voice to have around. And it used to make me die because she'd turn it on for the Angelus and then turn it off again. It was sat, the window ledge was covered. Yeah. But off it would come for the Angelus and on it would go again.
6 o'clock.
You're completely missing the point. And back in the days when the Angelus was just a picture, there wasn't even movement. But yeah.
You can just imagine her saying this to someone somewhere, these televisions are great.
Yeah. And she would be sitting there. Her armchair was there.
It's nearly 6.
Yeah. And on it would go. But sitting there in a wheelchair for hours on end, and if we weren't around, often, home help would come in twice a day. But other than that, she was sat in that position, unable to move because of her arthritis. Her sight was going, so she was an avid reader but couldn't read anymore. Yet when you saw her, she was just so happy, so content. Just there was something really magical about that. It's something I've never seen before or since.
Sounds like she could be related to you, Mike.
There may be some relation there somewhere, yeah.
Mike, thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, well done.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me into your home.
You're always welcome.
Cheers, man. Thank you for listening to the Win Happy podcast, which has been brought to you by Fusion Communications. If you'd like to get in touch, feel free to send me an email at greg@fusion.ie. So until next time, take it easy.